You're listening to
Catholic Sprouts,
the daily podcast for Catholic kids that strives to plant seeds of faith.
Hello, Sprouts! Today is Thursday, March 16th, and I'm Cecilia from the Hildegard Collective, a ministry for Catholic musicians. We're time traveling this week through musical history in the Catholic Church, and today we'll be picking up where we left off in the early 1800s, and we'll travel to the beginning of the 1900s. But before we begin, let's review what we learned about yesterday. We traveled through the Baroque and the Classical time periods. We learned about how Catholic composers in this time were writing music for both sacred settings and settings outside church, and we met the composers Antonio Vivaldi and Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Today, we're going to learn about the Romantic time period. Now, you might hear the word romantic and think about falling in love, like in fairy tales or Disney movies. But in the 1800s, the word romantic meant more than that. There was a whole movement in books and art called the Romantic movement, and it focused on things like nature and the meaning of life. Remember how we learned the other day that new things in music come after new things in art? This happened here in the Romantic time period too. Music historians say that the Romantic era began around the year 1827, which was a little later than the Romantic movement started in art and books. Composers still used key signatures and counterpoint during this time, but they started to push the rules and explore something called chromatic notes. These were notes that didn't fit inside a key signature, but they make melodies glide around and become either flashier or more thoughtful, depending on how the composer wants to use them. During the Romantic period, composers were still writing sacred music, but it was more because it was a thing to do for the composers, rather than because they loved God. See, the world was changing really quickly during this time. This was the time of the Industrial Revolution, when machines began to make things faster than humans could, and new ideas, some good and some bad, were spreading just as fast. One of the bad ideas was that people began to think that we didn't really need Jesus and his church. And sadly, a lot of musicians and artists went along with that idea. However, not all of them did. Today we're going to learn about a composer who really loved his Catholic faith when he was little, but then he went away from Jesus. But then he came back to him with his whole heart. This composer was Franz Liszt, one of the most well-known composers from the Romantic era. He was raised Catholic, and he actually wanted to become a priest when he was a boy. But Franz's dad didn't want him to become a priest. See, Franz also showed a lot of talent with the piano, and his dad pushed him to become a musician instead. So, a musician he became, and boy did Franz Liszt make his mark in music. You know how we have pop stars today? Franz was like a superstar back in his day. He was a super talented pianist, and he could do really fancy things on the piano that nobody else could. He was also a composer and wrote incredibly beautiful music. He toured Europe for years, and his concerts would sell out all over the place. Posters for his concerts would hang in store windows and at train stations. The ladies in the crowd would throw roses at the stage for him. Everybody loved Franz Liszt, and he loved being popular. But during these years of popularity, Franz felt tension between the faith that he was raised in and the choices he was making with his life. He liked the Catholic faith and thought it was really beautiful, but he also knew the choices he was making weren't ones Jesus would want him to make. He spent years in this tension until he met a princess. You heard that, a real princess. The Princess Caroline embraced her Catholic faith, and it inspired Franz to do the same thing. He struggled to let go of the things he used to do for several years, But over time, God granted him the graces to let go of his old life. He took minor orders and became a member of the clergy. And he spent the rest of his life giving lessons to people who couldn't afford them, holding concerts to raise money for charity, and writing beautiful music about Jesus. One of his most beautiful pieces of music is based on the Stations of the Cross. Franz died peacefully in the late 1800s, and his music is still famous today, played by pianists, orchestras, and even used in movie soundtracks. Well, Sprouts, today is our last day of time traveling. We're going to go into the 1900s until today and learn about how music changed over this time. And we're going to learn about a Catholic composer who went through some really scary things and still kept writing music to glorify God.
That's it for Catholic Sprouts today. We'll be back tomorrow, but until then, continue to grow in your faith and truly sprout into the beautiful creation that God created you to be.
Hello, parents. Thanks so much for letting me get to share all about music history in the Catholic Church with your kids today. I'm the co-founder of the Hildegard Collective, a nonprofit that helps Catholic musicians grow in their faith and meet like-minded musicians. We've got an active podcast and blog going that you can check out, and soon we'll be launching a platform for connection and faith formation as well. The Hildegard Collective was a finalist in the 2022 OSV Innovation Challenge, which is a program designed to build up innovative projects and ministries for the church today. If you want to learn more about what we do, check out the show notes for our website, podcast, and social media links. If you're a Catholic musician, we invite you to come join us. And if you know a Catholic musician, we invite you to share our ministry with them. Thanks so much for listening, and God bless.
This podcast is part of the Spoke Street Network. For more great podcasts, visit spokestreet.com.